Do you want to install a powered frunk on your Tesla Model 3 or Model Y, but you think it might be just too hard to get done? But on the other hand, having a powered frunk would be awesome, wouldn't it? You can open and close the frunk from the comfort of your car without having to get out of the car, just by pressing the button on the screen. But then you go online and you look and you see these kits and they look like they might be really hard to install. But on the other hand, it would be awesome if you have like your hands full of groceries and you need to walk up to the car and you just talk to your phone to say, open the frunk, and it opens. And then you put your groceries in, you press the button on the inside and it closes all by itself. But man, installing this thing looks like it's going to be really hard. So how do you decide? For me, when I'm trying to decide whether to tackle a project like this myself, it all depends on where it falls on what I call the Awesome-Hardness Scale. What is the Awesome-Hardness Scale? Well, I'm so glad you asked. Let me tell you. You see, the Awesome-Hardness Scale is a graph that tells you if a job is worth doing or not. You see, over here on the y-axis is the awesome scale. The more awesome a thing is, the further up the scale you go. Now, down here on the x-axis is the hard to install scale. The harder it is to install, the further to the right you go. Now, diagonally up the middle is something that I call the awesome hardness line. Anything that falls above that awesome hardness line is worth the effort. But if it falls below the awesome hardness line, it's simply just a waste of your time. So where does this version 5 Power Frunk from Hansshow fall? Well, on the awesome scale, it's probably up there, pretty high. But what about the hardness? Well, if you try to install this Power Frunk kit by using the provided instructions, well, I'm afraid to say it comes way over to the right on the hardness scale and probably falls below my awesome hardness line. However, you're in luck, because with better instructions, a real wiring diagram, and some YouTuber to give you tips and tricks along the way, that hardness drops significantly and you clearly and quickly fall above the awesome hardness scale. Now, you don't need to be intimidated by this kit. You really don't, because I've done the hard work for you. This project took me about 4 hours on a Sunday to install, and I had to do more than one thing more than once. I drew blood, and I might have had a minor panic attack along the way, and more on that later. Now that I'm on the other side, I can tell you with 100% certainty that this kit really isn't that hard to install. I'll admit the instructions are frankly terrible. However, this project is 100% doable, and it is worth it because this Power Frunk kit from Hansshow works great once you do. Now, if you have interest in installing a Power Frunk kit, I will tell you that watching this video will make your life significantly easier and less stressful. So with that, let's get started. Before we get any further in this video is not a step-by-step, bolt-for-bolt guide. I'm going to guide you through the areas that need help so you don't make the same mistakes that I did. Now, if you want to watch a video that is a step-by-step, bolt-for-bolt instruction, follow the link in the description below to see a video by the Test Bros that they did about a year ago, and they really did a great job taking you step-by-step. However, I will admit that the product has evolved since this video, so it doesn't match up 100%. That's what this video is for. Now, with that out of the way, let's get started by taking inventory of what's inside the box, because most of it looks completely foreign. All right, let's dig in and get inside this box and look at all the components. The first thing you're going to see are these long cylinder items. These are the replacement struts, followed by the suction latch and emergency release. Here's the control module. You get some brackets that are going to hold the struts, along with a wiring harness, some mounting hardware. This is the 12-volt plus power connector with fuse and the optional toe kick sensor. The next thing that we're going to want to do is make sure that you have the right tools for the job. You can find a list below. In my case, I clearly didn't need everything that I show here. So now let's get started with the install. Start by removing the frunk pan. It's just 4 bolts and a pop pin, and it pulls right out. It looks intimidating, but really it comes out super slick. Tessa did a nice job designing it. The instructions up to this point are okay. So tip number 1 here is remove the HEPA filter if your car has one. There are only 2 bolts that hold this thing, and it lifts right out in one piece. The instructions don't mention anything of this. Do me a favor, take out your HEPA filter. You will thank me later. Next, you need to remove the hood struts. These are the cylinders that actually support the hood, which leads to tip number 2. Use a pick tool to pop off the top of the strut. Let the bottom just dangle. Don't worry about sticking your hands down in there to try to pop it off. It'll dangle because what you have to do is you have to remove the bolt that is attached to. So simply with a wrench, reach down in there and unbolt that ball joint, and the entire assembly will come out. That will make your life a lot easier. Make sure that you brace the hood with something, because that hood will fall once the struts are removed. In my case, I used a piece of wood. Next, you'll need to install some brackets that came with the kit. So tip number 3, don't use the part that you just took off to secure the brackets like I did. It wasn't clear in the instructions, and you can see that I actually showed you here in the video to use the provided bolt. Don't do that. There is a flat hex bolt provided in the kit that you need to use, which leads me to tip number 4, which is these strut locations are super tight. The driver's side is really, really tight, so do yourself a favor and get a very small hex ratchet so you can reach down in there and get that bolt tightened up. I had something that wasn't quite small enough, and I wish it was a little bit smaller, and I ended up drawing blood in the process trying to get my hand down there and get everything all tightened up. The smaller the wrench you can get, the better off you are going to be. From there, you're going to install the new motorized struts, and they just basically snap on to the lower bracket and the upper connection point. Do that on both sides. The instructions are pretty clear. The wires should be mounted at the bottom, and if you want to start routing some of those wires back into the main cabin, now would be a good time to do that. So once this new electronic struts are installed, you no longer need to support the hood. You can remove that board because it isn't needed anymore. From there, we need to move up to the front of the car. This is where the hood actually latches in with the car, and we need to make a modification there. Now, what we need to do is we need to install a bracket mechanism that mounts to the existing latch system, and in order to do that, you need to take it off. So tip number 5, get a silver Sharpie, and I say silver or white Sharpie, to mark where that front latch mechanism is before you unbolt it, because that affects the overall alignment of your hood. I used a black one. It was too hard to see. If you use a silver Sharpie or a white Sharpie against the interior black paint, just mark around the edges so when you go to put this bracket back on, you're going to have a reasonably good shot of getting it installed where it needs to go. Now, mounting this extra bracket involves disconnecting a spring. It's the spring that holds the latch that keeps everything locked down. You're gonna have to take that spring off, add a wire attachment, and then put the spring back on. And tip number 6, when you put that spring back on, it is vital that you put it on correctly. You see, I didn't know it at the time, but I didn't pay attention to where the other side of the spring was attached. At this point, I was totally screwed, but I just didn't know it yet, which leads me to my next tip, tip number 7. Take the time to route the emergency release before you close it for the first time. I didn't do that, and I paid the price. And I could have prevented my panic attack, and we'll get to that here in just a bit. Now, what we need to do now is tackle the wiring harness, and I have to admit, even with me with an electrical engineering degree, I found the wiring harness rather intimidating. Not so much because there are a lot of wires, and there are a lot of wires, but because the wiring schematic simply doesn't have enough information. Every wire has a marking on it. It's got a label, but the instructions don't tell you where any of it goes. So I've done the work for you to come up with a wiring diagram that you can hopefully follow, and all you have to do is pause this video and see where each of the wires go, and you'll have to deal with the problems that I had to deal with. All right, I think we are on tip number 9. And what you want to do is you want to start untangling the wires and positioning them in the general area where they need to go. And do this now. I guarantee you it will save you pain later down the road, because you want to make sure that all of these wires aren't tight and aren't being pulled. So when you put the pan back in the Tesla, it isn't going to pull on any of the wires unnecessarily. Now, once you have everything connected, it's time to hook up the power. And for this, you will need to connect the power cable to the battery, and you will need to use a separate cable that was inside the box that came. It's not part of the main wiring harness. Go look inside the box for it. It should have a fuse attached to it, which is something I didn't see right away. You are now ready to make it work for the first time. However, before you press that button, manually lower that hood to make sure that the hood matches up with the latch. You just need to be close at this point. You want to make sure that it isn't going to get hung up on anything. So now the moment of truth. Will it close? Press the button or tap the frunk on your phone and the hood will close and latch. Press the button and the frunk should open. And in my case, it didn't. The hood wouldn't open. It was stuck shut, and the emergency release that I failed to route was inside the car. Yeah, I was totally screwed at this point. At least I thought I was. And this was the event that triggered my panic attack. How in the heck was I gonna get that hood open? I had all the rest of the car pulled out, and I had a trunk that was latched, and I couldn't open it. I ended up using a plastic pry tool and playing around with the open latch, and frankly, I don't know how I got it to open, but it took me about, I would say, 20 to 30 minutes of my 4-hour install was trying to get that open. Now, once I opened it, I figured out that I didn't connect the spring correctly. I had fixed one side of the spring, but the other side of the spring had come loose. So once I made that repair and I put it all back together, I was ready to run my emergency release out the front. Wasn't going to repeat that problem twice. And now I was ready to give it a try again. My heart was pounding. Was it going to go down? Was it going to go back up? And it worked. It worked, and it worked great. Run the hood up and down a few times. Make sure it works. Make sure that is aligned the way that you want to. Now that you're satisfied that the hood is working the way that you want, it is time to move to the final phase of this project, which is the clean up and put it all back together phase. And in order to do that, the first thing you're going to need to do is you're going to want to mount the suction module, which helps open the hood for you. It's part of the kit, and that gets mounted, and I put it behind the front light on the driver's side, tucked out of the way of the pan. And from what I can tell, there's no place to actually bolt it on, so I used the large provided tie wraps to do that. Now, the next thing you're going to want to do is mount that control module. And for me, I found the best place to put it was underneath the HEPA filter on a flat surface, because there's no place to bolt that on either. They do give you some double-sided tape, and it seemed like a good surface to put it on, and that's actually where it ended up going, and that's where I show it on the wiring diagram. From there, just route the wires to wherever they make sense and use the provided zip ties to secure those wires to other wires in the car. Once that's done, test it a few more times. Make sure that hood is still aligned. You may need to adjust that a little bit by moving that front bracket slightly. Remember, we had those white marks to help line that up, but you may need to make some final adjustments. I personally didn't need to do that. Once you're satisfied with the alignment of the hood, install the HEPA filter, put the frunk pan back in, and you're done. Now, I know that looked like a bit of a journey through a dangerous jungle. However, I can tell you that if you follow the tips that I gave you and the wiring diagram that I created, you will do just fine. And if I had to do this again, I bet I could do it in under an hour and a half and draw a lot less blood. Clearly, with these changes, this project definitely falls above the Awesome-Hardness line. Finally, if you decide this is right for you, make sure you use the code IowaTeslaGuy at checkout to save a full 15% on your order. Thanks for sticking around. Hopefully you found this video useful. If you did, I'd appreciate you hitting that like, and if you are new to the channel, please tap that subscribe button to see more videos like this. Thanks so much for watching, and we'll catch you on the next one.